Welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. I'm Kelsey Zeiser. I'm an editor here at Light Reading.
My name is Phil Harvey. I am also an editor here at Light Reading.
And I am Keri Gilder. I'm the CEO of Colt Technology Services based in the UK.
Keri, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this conversation.
Yeah, and you've had a number of roles at Colt. Can you tell us a little bit just about yourself and your journey at Colt to CEO?
Yeah, I started 6 years ago at Colt. I started as the chief commercial officer, and so I had responsibility for the full front end of the business. So sales, marketing, customer service management. And I was driving that for about a year and a half before I became CEO in May of 2020, about 2 months after the COVID pandemic broke out. So it was a very interesting time to become a CEO. But I'm a techie, so I have a network engineering background. I've built many networks over the years, and that's how I got my start, and that's where I am today.
Excellent. Yeah, I want to talk about network stuff. Kelsey, did you have a follow-up, or do you want me to just
no, go for
barrel in and start messing things up?
Barrel on in.
Good. So, I mean, one of the most recent things that Colt has talked about was the terabit transmission accomplishment for with Ciena. They sent a terabit signal wavelength transmission across the Atlantic, and I'm curious, obviously we want to know overall, like, what kind of progress Colt is making in subsea connectivity and what's driving that business, but I'm also curious about that particular technology sort of breakthrough and what you think that kind of signals to your customers.
Yeah, I think what's cool about subsea is you can go all the way back to World War II days when the transmission actually happened, between the U.S. and the U.K. Across those lines while the world was fighting that war. And I think that kind of gives the history of subsea. It's been around for a long time. Over that time, there has been a lot of technology changes. And one of them is just this. We did do the first terabit transmission with Ciena. To me, it's substantial because a lot of companies, a lot of people still think that all communication is done over wireless and it's over the airways. And the reality is more than 90% of communications are done over fiber, and fiber cables specifically connecting continents like the ones in the Atlantic. And so for us, it's a big signal that you can push a significant amount of capacity over one piece of fiber across the Atlantic. And that's something that wasn't capable, we weren't capable of doing before, because the end systems called CLSs, they weren't actually capable of, pushing that much bandwidth through the fiber. And now the technology has expanded. The dense wave division multiplexing technology has advanced so much that we can. And so it means that we can get more out of those systems. Those systems typically cost, on the upwards of $300K or more to put in. And so the more bandwidth and capacity we can put over one fiber, the less systems we have to put into the sea over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there's an interesting sort of other note for that announcement. If folks listening to this want to go look it up, the energy usage on that transmission was also kind of a record in and of itself, and that it was, even though it was over a terabit transmission, it was significantly less than what was being used to do, I would say 800 gig or whatever, before. So it was quite an achievement. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing when it comes to talking about, like I said, subsea connectivity and fiber scarcity and stuff like that, it's like there's definitely a demonstration that there's still pretty amazing upside for the fiber that's in the ground now and in the sea, under the sea. In the sea? How do you say that? I'm just an editor. I don't know these things.
I would say
Kelsey,
in the
help.
sea. In the sea. Yeah, in the sea.
I think so. I was
Anyway,
going to say
it
under
was
the
a
sea, so
pretty
no help.
yeah, right. It was a pretty big deal, and I'm curious about the because I think now Colt has like 5 subsea cables that and a couple of landing stations in the U.S. So this is a growing part of your portfolio and your business. Is the is that just to sort of satisfy the existing business, or is this seen as a growth business for you?
It's been shown that the compound annual growth rate on subsea is still quite strong. It's still in the double digits, and I think that will continue. I think the reason that is because as globalization has happened, as we start to see AI come to the forefront and large language models being built in different continents, you're going to see more traffic going over these cables. And I believe that there's still, even though companies like Google are building on the upwards of 20, 30, 40 cables over the course of the next 10 years, there's still a lot of supply. There's still not a lot of supply of cables in certain parts of the world, and some of them are actually getting really old. If you look at the Pacific in particular, those cables are quite old, and there is a refresh that has to happen. And that's one of the things that we were able to obtain when we acquired Lumen Europe, Middle East, Africa assets last year. We did acquire multiple subsea cables. Some of those were old, and some of them were new, like Grace Hopper, which we have with partnership with Google. And so I think there's a transition of the old infrastructure onto the new, that we're going to see migrations of that happening. And then we are still going to see massive demand for landing these cables in various parts of the world as we go on. And I think that's really the key going forward. And if you look at AI and where it's going, it's seeking cheap power. And so I think we could actually start seeing different areas, whether it's geopolitical and trying to avoid the Red Sea, or it is driving a more efficient energy source where those cables land. I think we'll start to see some different, landing areas and new cables going in places that we've never seen them go before.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you called that out, because that's kind of on the terrestrial side of things. That's been happening on the data center side for a while. They're building data centers in different power grids just so they can avoid the congestion of urban areas, and the pricing for urban areas. So it stands to reason that what you're saying is coming true, that in the subsea market, they're doing the exact same thing, kind of gravitating toward where the power and the utility supply is more plentiful and the power is less expensive, I guess.
Yeah, because if you think about it, I always think about it as a trifecta. It's power, it's data center, and it's fiber. And those 3 components are required for any connectivity in any business to run these days. And so if we're trying to be more sustainable by design, like Colt, then you have to actually seek it. And AI takes 160% more power than a normal cloud data center. And so if that's the case, then the first thing you're going to seek is number one, do I have power? 2, where's the cheap power? And then do I have connectivity to it? And so that's the way that we look at the next generation of digital infrastructure and how it's going to be built.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier Lumen, and I know that a few years ago Colt acquired Lumen's EMEA business. Can you talk a little bit about what that acquisition added to your network and how it changed your business?
Yeah, so what it did Colt was the largest B2B service provider, connectivity provider in Europe. And Lumen EMEA was the second largest provider in Europe. And so the combination of the two makes us by far the largest provider in Europe. And even if you actually took all of the other pan-European operators and you combine them, we would still be bigger. And so what it basically means is we are your B2B provider if you're wanting to cross country territories within Europe. And we are also your B2B provider transatlantic because of the cables that we have and the 2 landing stations with backhaul that we have in North America. But we also have strong capacity in Asia, in Japan, and through some of our partner ecosystems. So what it did was it added 10 new countries to our base, whether that be South Africa or Turkey, for example, or some of the countries up in the Nordics. And then it also added a substantial amount of fiber infrastructure, including duct infrastructure, that we didn't have before. And so it's put us in this prime position to take advantage of, of that next generation of AI that's coming as well. And maybe I'll add a little bit to that. The interesting thing that we saw when the purchase happened is that Colt was building our networks one way and Lumen EMEA was building their networks another way. What we saw was that one was a ring architecture, one was a star architecture. And what's required for AI is the combination. So
really
if you look at our architecture now, we actually don't need to re-architect for AI. We just need to combine the networks, which is what we're doing right now. And so it provides that mesh within the city center. It provides, call it the express routes in the mid-mile, to the data centers. And then it applies that capability, to the long haul pan-European, what we call the flop network. And so it's this perfect combination that kind of happened by chance, if I'm honest, but it was a great outcome of the acquisition.
What was the what is it about AI that demands those two different types of network architecture? Obviously it's probably a latency issue and a capacity issue, but what is it? Well, I guess why do you have to have both? I'm a little foggy on that.
It's because of so the large language models are largely between the data centers, and that is kind of the express lane. So you're going back and forth. Capacity needs to be big in the mid-mile and in the long haul in order to do that training between the language models wherever they are. And those are usually in different, parts of the city or even in different countries. The inference model, the enterprise AI model, is closer to prem. Okay. And so what you actually need is a hybrid combination where you can get that latency from the large language model data center around that express route and then into those arteries, so to say, to the on-prem environment. And as inference happens, we're going to see more and more of that. It hasn't really moved to that level yet where you have edge compute and you need that on-prem environment where there's some proprietary data that's held there and some, training that's going on there where it doesn't actually have to go out to the large language model. It can remain in the small language model for a period of time. And so that's why you need that combination, because you need to be able to express it when you can, but then be able to get into the enterprise, directly to the enterprise environment, when you need to. And we just expanded our on-demand capability to over 160,000 enterprise sites in the UK, or not in the UK, in Europe. And what that basically means is that we can turn up and we can turn down service for a week, a month, an hour, and do that fully flexible for whatever our customers need. So that plays into that architecture as well. If we have to move where our customers move, then we can do that, and we can do it on demand.
Excellent. Thanks for
Yeah.
covering that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and of course, want to talk more about AI with you. Can we dive in further to how AI is a demand generator in your network and what your customers are looking to Colt for to support their own AI applications?
Yeah, it's interesting right now because I know there's all this buzz around AI, and I think in the US it is front and center. But if you actually look at where the economic spend is happening on AI right now, it is primarily in the US. And you guys probably know this better than I do, but right now there's been about 4% of the overall AI digital infrastructure spend in Europe. There's been 0.5% in the UK, 6% in Asia, and the rest is happening in North America. So I would say right now, the big spend is happening with the hyperscale companies, Microsoft, all the SaaS providers, and they're building out these huge large language model data centers in the US. We've not seen that level of spend yet in Europe or the UK, but it is coming. We see some of it popping up in different regions like France, Germany. We're starting to see a few of these, but there's some complications that happen in Europe. One is regulations. So if you look at the GDPR requirements in Europe, those are preventing some AI capability to come here. And we just saw in the news the other day, Meta being fined yet again for data protection. The other thing that is a bit of a challenge here is power. Recently, Google tried to build a large data center in Ireland, and actually we're told you can't build here because you're going to exhaust the public grid. And so there's a few issues that we have to figure out in Europe, whether it be regulatory or power, in order to see a larger demand coming into the region. What I will say is we're ready for it. And with sustainability as a major differentiator for Colt, we believe that we can solve the power problem largely on the inference side anyway. What we're working on is, can we also help to solve some of the regulatory issues with looking at data sovereignty, and with our with our kind of platinum EcoVadis rating on corporate binding rules against GDPR. We're pretty much experts in the industry around this area, and we think we can help our customers, get around some of those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is AI usage or training adding a noticeable load to the network in terms of network traffic or bandwidth needs at the moment, or is this still
Not
sort
yet.
of being sorted out?
It's still being sorted out. We see it coming. Europe is usually about 12 to 18 months behind the US. So we see it coming. It's starting to come, but it's definitely not here. And yeah, I think it's there also needs to be a bit of a reality check in regard to AI, because we will see mass amounts of data in the mid mile and in the long haul. And again, when it comes to enterprise AI, we will see that starting to go to the enterprise sites. I question whether ever you're going to see big demand in the consumer side.
Yeah, I do too, but
Yeah.
that's my own technology grumpiness more than
Yeah.
actual industry trend.
Phil Harvey,
I think it's
technology
true though,
grump.
right? ChatGPT, if you do a prompt today, it doesn't take any more bandwidth than an email.
Yeah, really. It's not, and people aren't using it for, exhaustive things. They're just like, how old is that building? Or, just kind of
Yeah.
really simple transactional or, knowledge transactional things. I think it could be tremendously helpful combined with augmented reality for like, um, you know, specific commercial applications, but on the consumer side of things, sorry, Steve Ballmer, but I don't know if you're watching a basketball game if you need anything more than a basketball game, to keep you occupied. Anyway, I'll stop before I get myself into more trouble. I have a lot of people hang on words and make me eat them later.
Get comfy in
Let's
that
see.
hole.
I did have a question about just kind of going back to the Lumen acquisition, EMEA business acquisition. I know that was kind of a one-off because of the size and the scale of that operation, and then also it was probably a one-off because of kind of the repositioning that Lumen was having, in terms of its own business, that even came up for sale. But Colt has been acquisitive in the past. I mean, it has bought businesses here and there. Is there a particular kind of business that either Colt or Fidelity looks at and sees as right for the portfolio, as you're building out capacity in different nations?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because, of course, we're always looking at two things. One, how we can add scale to the physical fiber network, because that's really important. And I think it's even getting more important as our world starts being more what I would call commoditized. As an industry, we were just deemed as critical infrastructure and basically a necessary requirement for living, and I think that's true in definitely the Western world and all of the mature markets. That's definitely the case. But as that's happened, what we've also seen is that there has been, to some extent, an oversupply, at least in Europe, an oversupply of FTTH fiber and under consumption of fiber that's already in ground. And so I think there's a trade-off between when you need to own the infrastructure and make sure that actually you can build it and they will come kind of scenario, because that's less and less the case.
Yeah.
Versus using partnerships around the world. Telecoms are used to using partners, and we're really good. We have 240 APIs built between different operators around the world, which also provides us a different kind of scale, but it does enable us to basically connect anywhere in the globe and make that pretty easy as a transaction for our customers. And so I would say, yes, we're always looking at where it makes sense for us to either acquire or build additional fiber infrastructure. I think we're also very honest with ourselves about where we have a right to do that and where either geopolitically it makes sense for us going forward. And so, our concentration, I would say, is highly in the parts of the world where Western enterprise wants to participate.
Okay, that makes sense. Kelsey, you want to switch topics or keep going?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to, as we're circling back to different things, go back to some of your comments as we were discussing AI on sustainability. Wanted to hear from you about what you feel like some of the biggest challenges in ESG are and how service providers can better support sustainability efforts.
Yeah, I think so we started really thinking about sustainability, and I mean environmental sustainability, about 4 years ago, right before COVID, about a year before COVID hit. And it wasn't really something people were talking about at that time. We just knew that we needed to do something. So we created green teams within Colt, and those were both for doing community efforts, doing personal efforts on how to live greener on a day-to-day basis. We did hackathons in order to get some best practices out there. We sent 2 of our Colties down to Antarctica and did basically a mission with Robert Swan to really learn what was happening to the climate and come back with some ideas and some partnerships in order to help develop our thinking around this. And what's happened since then is we've actually reduced our carbon emissions by over 36% since 2019, which is substantial. We have been able to have an EcoVadis Platinum rating, which only 1% of the companies in the world actually have. I'm pretty sure we're still the only telecoms operator. And we have a CDP rating of A. Now, how did we get there? Well, first and foremost, what you have to look at is the amount of legacy equipment you have in your architecture, because it takes up massive amounts of power and massive amounts of space. And if you don't start there, you're not going to get anywhere. And the problem that telcos have, especially now, when the majority of operators have declining revenue year over year and they have increasing tech debt, is it's becoming harder and harder to prove in the use case to remove the old equipment. Mm-hmm. And so what we said is we have to throw out the old process document and the old business case on return on investment capital associated with, getting that removal done. And we just have to do it because it's the right thing to do. And we have to advance to the next generation technology, like we talked about with the terabit wavelengths, that is much smaller. It allows a higher capacity and it uses less power. And so we did that, and we went on a mission to remove all of our SDH equipment in our infrastructure, and we successfully did that over about 2.5 years. And that's really how we got the carbon reduction, in addition to many other things, but that was the primary thing that we did. Was we thought very differently about addressing the legacy infrastructure, and I think that's what telco operators have to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah. In addition to that, I've heard you speak before about the supply chain. Can you talk a little bit about how that might also impact your sustainability strategy?
Yeah, it's another interesting one. We've done a lot of learning over time, and now we're pretty much solid on our goals for scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 science-based targets are 100% based on the ecosystem and the partnerships that you use. So we have a green procurement program that basically vets out our partners to ensure that they are going to enable us to meet these requirements, that they are actually paying attention to that reduction in power, the reduction in space, and then also, very importantly, how they actually recycle old equipment. And that is maybe not thought of very often, but it is a critical factor in this, because it's one thing to rip out the equipment and put new equipment in, which our vendors obviously are helping us do. And they're very happy for us to give them a purchase order on that new equipment. But it's much harder when you think about, okay, now what do I do with this old equipment? And so we have a recycle program that we've been working on. And we also have a precious mineral mining program. And so what we've been able to do is take that equipment and then actually mine the precious metals out for reuse. And then we've also been able to recycle. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think we've recycled enough equipment that it would equate to, I think, an Airbus 380 or something like that. It's a massive tonnage of equipment that we've been able to recycle. And I think that's the critical factor, is not only getting your vendors to innovate and build in the right way, but also think about how do you look at their old equipment and, deal with the recycling of it.
Mm-hmm.
How tough is it? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's I've always had mixed feelings about recycling, just because of the, energy required to do it, and sometimes not that effective. But I'm glad you brought up I think the precious metals piece of it is so important, because reusing those finite resources is Yeah, especially critical.
Makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
It's critical. The other thing I would bring up on this, which is interesting because I think there's always greenwashing that's going on, and we found this at the beginning of our program when we started trying to figure out how to be sustainable in everything that we do. So, one example is we actually worked with our travel agency to start carbon reporting for our employees when they took a flight or when they actually did a train ride or whatever it was, so that they could make a choice that was a more sustainable choice for that flight or for that travel, and they get a carbon report now every month so that they know, and they actually have to build that within their budget. So we made it a little bit challenging for them because we said, here's your carbon budget and here's your financial budget, and you have to make both of these work. And so that was holding each employee accountable on that instance. But the other thing that we did with that is every time we did a major trip, like a sales conference or anything like that, we actually planted trees to do the carbon offset of those trips. And what we found very quickly is not all carbon offset is the same. And you really need to do massive investigation as to urban tree planting or, planting trees in a field in Africa or wherever it will be. Sometimes those trees get planted and sometimes they don't. So you have to really do some investigation on carbon offset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because that's been widely mocked in the in the consumer world of like, oh, yeah, so you're telling me every time I buy a pair of socks, you plant a tree. That doesn't seem sustainable at all, but whatever.
Yeah.
I had a quick question about just sort of the telecom kind of procurement cycle as it pertains to sustainability. So you made a comment about how, and this is something that definitely happens in telcos, that there's kind of a mindset of sweating the assets until, over a span. I think traditional telecom equipment had like a buying cycle of 20 years or something crazy.
Yeah.
And so was it tough to convince, a board of directors or other folks in the business that this pattern needed to be abandoned? Because, what we see at our traditional telcos in the US is that they just hang on to everything and keep using it, and maybe they move it around. But that doesn't really help them in terms of the sustainability issue. And it also creates, I think, maybe more worries for them than over the long period, because you have to kind of constantly keep different types of expertise around for an increasingly small population of your customer base. So was that a big uphill climb for Colt, or was that something that the company just kind of knew it needed to do?
This is what I would say. We did it over time. And so we didn't have a big ask into the board. I think if we did, I think there still would have been some scrutiny on it. That being said, Fidelity is amazing at thinking about sustainability as well. They, in their building in Boston, they purposefully saved green area outside of their building, and where they could have built a parking lot, and they actually did the parking lot underneath the building to save the green area. And so they're always also, it is always top of mind for them as well. And so I think they would have understood the sustainability aspect. It always comes down to dollars and cents. And I think that's the part that is hard to prove in when you are you're constantly challenged on OPEX to revenue ratio. And so I think that what you have to look at is what you do on a day-to-day basis, and can you do that over time rather than big bang. And it needs to be a habitual change in your daily activity rather than here's a big project that we're rolling out and we're going to do it, in this time frame, et cetera. And that's how we took it on. We didn't put a big project wrapper around it. We said, when you're going to site and you're putting in a new piece of gear, you're going to double time and you're going to take out that piece of gear as well. And so we were quite methodical about the approach, but we also didn't do it in such a way that it put additional pressure on our OPEX to revenue ratios, so that there was this massive cost up front. It was over time. And so I think that's a different way of thinking about telco. Seems to always think in projects, and it is a project, but it's more a daily habit. So how do you change that daily process in order to accommodate the sustainability aspect of going to a site versus not? And of course, you have to plan that a little bit, because you have to think about your customer migrations off of that equipment, et cetera. But we know how to do that. So that's what I would say. It's You have to think about it as a process habit, how to change the process versus how to get the project approved.
Yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Oh, I was just going to say, Keri, I feel like we could talk to you for another hour, but I know you have a company to run. So would love to have you on again. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been fun. Appreciate you having me on.